Justice Puzzle by David Newdorf. Chapter 1. The First 4 Days, January 10th to 13th, 1996. Dad got drunk, fell off his balcony, and died. I got the call in the middle of the night, Wednesday, so early Thursday in New York. I arrived in LA 3 nights later, maybe 4 nights, I don't know. Call it 4 nights. Either way, my week was fucked. Well, fucked and not in the good way. Not hot boy date that evening, no Friday night at the Regency, original 1945 director's cut of Bogey and Bacall in The Big Sleep, and no frantic weekend salvaging my dissertation. The timing was inconvenient. I know that was a shitty reaction to the news my father had died unexpectedly. Hate me if you must. But I came around before long. After all, despite his frequent absences, Abe Fleischman had been the good parent. In my wackadoodle tender years, that meant the one who did less harm. The next 2 days were a flaming hot Cheetos of a mess. My balance at Chemical Bank barely covered the plane fare home, and I dreaded having to ask my mother for a little extra to pay the rent next month. Not that she couldn't afford it. Also, classes for the new term were starting. As a graduate TA, I taught an intro literature class each semester at Columbia. No surprise, but it was hard to find another TA willing to cover the first meeting of my literature humanities class, which was 8:30 a.m. Monday. No one likes early classes on a Monday. I contemplated offering sexual favors as an enticement. A hum job for a lit hum, anyone? Paying the rent and finding a TA to cover my class were just the start of my worries. Pablo, a.k.a. Hot Boy, took the date cancellation well enough but went full-on postal when I said he couldn't come with me to Los Angeles for the funeral. We'd been dating all of 3 weeks. I should have known he'd be drama. How could an NYU film student not be? Another reason to date older men as if I needed one. I just naturally go for the silver fox daddy types, but hadn't had one since I dumped my last LA lover. By late Saturday night, when the taxi dropped me around the corner from my father's apartment, the gravity of the situation had sunk in. A question brought me to a dead stop. Will there be blood? There'd been plenty, or so I'd been told, but would it still be there? The possibility fueled a childhood terror rising inside. I shivered like a chihuahua shitting peach pits. Steeling myself, I started again at a trot toward the apartment. The Venice Beach boardwalk was desolate at that hour. The shuttered t-shirt shops and hot dog stands, familiar sights by day, grew threatening under the yellow glare of the street lamps. Even the swaying palms had become sinister. The ocean roared in the darkness behind me as I fumbled for the keys. The ice plants next to the door rustled, causing me to jump. Crap. Just a lousy beach rat. But the keys slipped through my butterfingers into the dense ground cover where the beast hid. I fished for them, praying not to be bitten as another menace vied for attention. A patch of cement spider-webbed with cracks to the left of the door. For God's sake, Sam, don't look. It had been 3 days since the accident. By then, someone should have scrubbed the pavement under the balcony, right? But even a splotch, the blood of Abraham, would be horrific. I made it inside, spared of any grisly sight. Nothing about the place was pretentious. Lobby was too grandiose a word for the entryway. You couldn't swing the door open without hitting the brass mailboxes on the wall. Anteroom? Or maybe vestibule? My father called it the foyer. His pronunciation, foyer, betrayed his Brooklyn roots. I huffed up 2 flights of narrow stairs to the top floor. They'd call his unit the penthouse if it were in one of the new buildings sprouting up on the boardwalk. Posh edifices with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean were replacing vintage stucco structures like eucalyptus trees crowding out native oaks in the canyons. This 1920s Spanish Art Deco mashup had avoided the wrecking ball for now, and Dad's unit was just plain old apartment 5. Inside, I drew a lungful of stuffy air. The musty bass note was the scent of ancient carpet blended with eau de wet socks. The drapes were closed, and the windows had been shut for a few days. An ocean breeze would clear it out, but the underlying mildewy smell would linger. There was just enough light to discern the outline of the tattered living room club chair. My dad could be found lounging there most weekends. Every Sunday, if he wasn't working or traveling, he would brew a strong black cup in the Mr. Coffee. How he found a place in L.A. that stocked chock-full-o'-nuts coffee, his favorite New York brand, was a mystery. Then he'd relax into a slouch in his comfy chair with a steaming mug on the coffee table. A satisfied "ah" invariably followed the first sip. Crisp folds of newsprint would frame the crossword puzzle in his lap. The morning sunlight would angle through the window, throwing a bright rhombus onto the wood floor that had aged to a dark chocolate hue. The sea breeze would ruffle his head full of brown hair, only in the past few years streaked silver gray. Middle age had tiptoed in. My father rotated his morning coffee mugs, each one bearing a joke or logo. "World's okayest dad," a gift from me 2 Father's Days ago. Or "L.A. Dodgers," probably a garage sale find. The closest to a matched set were 5 mugs from the annual conferences of the Society of Logistics Engineers, a.k.a. SOUL. Each mug marked a different meeting. Scottsdale, 1986, for example, was pumpkin orange. Fort Lauderdale, 1992, the flamingo pink one, was newer but chipped and faded. It must have seen more use than the others. Besides the organization's logo, it bore a custom imprint, Abe Fleischman, President. He'd joined SOUL. Did the slide rule and pocket protector set think the acronym was hip? When we moved from Brooklyn. I was 5 years old then, 23 now. I flipped on the living room lights. The chair was empty, of course. The words of my Brighton Beach Zeta came to me. May his memory be a blessing. Huh! Was it a blessing to feel like an anxious 5-year-old waiting for Daddy to get home? Was that grieving? If only there'd been more for me to remember him by. I'd taken for granted there would be time to rectify the past and bury unspoken grievances. He'd only been 49 years old. I continued room to room, opening windows and turning on lamps. The apartment had come furnished. The tattered armchair where Dad did his puzzles matched the sofa. The rumpled sofa cushions had come with the Depression. My body had deepened the hollow with occasional overnight stays. The stove and fridge were avocado green, an appliance color that had been out of fashion for years. The light fixtures were standard hardware store issue, and the paint job on the off-white walls was streaked. Like a budget hotel room, it stank of anonymity. Not a family photo or heirloom in sight. The refrigerator door was devoid of souvenir magnets. Dad's finishing touch had been the discount store art posters on 2 walls. Other than that, he left it as it was when he moved here from our family home in Benedict Canyon. That was 3 years ago. He could have spruced it up, money wasn't an issue, but the generic vibe must have suited him. Any straight, middle-aged white guy could have lived there. Butcher, baker, or, like my dad, aerospace exec. I'd never noticed it before, but the place was schlumpy. Sorry, Dad, but no one could mistake the shabbiness for chic. The beachfront bachelor pad used to tickle me. It was like bubbles in my nose from a fresh spritz of seltzer. Now it was the flat taste of yesterday's Coca-Cola. Apparently the effervescence had been his presence. Only the eclectic mug collection personalized the space. No, 2 more items bore his imprimatur. On the coffee table sat an envelope addressed in his handwriting to Sam Fleischman, 523 West 110th Street, New York, New York. My mouth went as dry as an unbuttered matzah. The standard letter-size envelope was empty. He'd sent postcards from his business trips when I was a kid, but he'd written me only 1 letter. That had been a heartfelt plea after I announced I wouldn't register for the draft when I turned 18. It wasn't patriotism, he'd urged, but pragmatism. Failure to register was a felony. Next to the envelope was the newspaper puzzle page, folded into quarters with his trademark crisp edges. The quarter folds were a holdover from when he'd done the crosswords while packed into the rush-hour B train in New York. His neat, square capital letters in blue ink partially filled the grid. Some puzzle solvers were wishy-washy and favored eraser-tipped pencils. They'd write, erase, and rewrite their answers. Not Abe. He used a pen. Right or wrong, my father's answers were indelible. Even though we hadn't spent a lot of time together, both the puzzle habit and his penchant for ink had rubbed off on me. My fingertips were blotched blue from solving the Saturday puzzle on the flight to L.A. His unfinished puzzle was dated January 10th, 1996, the day he died. He had surely expected to finish it. That duty fell to me, the only child. But other matters pressed. My mother Sheila was a maelstrom of meat on a bitchy bun, a true shit-show sandwich. My parents had separated 3 years earlier, but for whatever reason, never divorced. As much as I would have liked to avoid her, I had to see her. Are you sensing mommy issues? Yep. Daddy issues? For sure. Call me an equal opportunity whiner. Grief weighed on me, but not in the way I'd expected. I loved my father and would miss him, but whatever emotions I felt, they didn't seem to be the right ones. Shouldn't a loss this big be as painful and constant as a toothache, only more agonizing? This felt more like when the dentist gives you a shot of Novocaine before drilling out a cavity. After the sting of the needle, it was painless, just noise, vibration, and a sickening, burning smell. I was grateful Sheila, I hadn't called her Mom in years, had taken care of the arrangements with the mortuary. But what would the mourners, mostly strangers, expect of me? The thought of playing the role of grieving son gave me stage fright. I'd rather sort through my feelings in private. These obligations, one piled on another, were as pesky as splinters in my tuchus. So fuck it. A brief go at the puzzle would distract me. Perhaps it was a mark of laziness, but as usual I started with a short word, 28 down, 5 spaces. Date you might not put on the calendar. I knew that one, of course. Tryst. T-R-Y-S-T. But my father had already filled in the intersecting answer to 28 across. Money laundering. The two answers, 28 down and 28 across, had to have the same first letter. Both words couldn't be right. Abe was the puzzle maven. The mistake had to be mine, but the clues for words that intersected with my 5-letter answer gave me confidence I was right. The clue to 28 across was another nickname for Honest Abe. Dad's answer made no sense. Where had he come up with money laundering? The rail splitter was a more likely fit. 15 letters and starting with a T. I couldn't bear to write over my father's work. Sons may one day surpass their fathers. That is the circle of life. But Abe had been in his prime. Even if he'd been blotto, his puzzle-solving prowess couldn't have sunk that low. I flung the puzzle onto the Formica kitchen counter, where it slid into Mr. Coffee. My right foot tap-tap-tapped, vibrating like autumn's last leaf clinging to the branch. The middle-of-the-night call 3-4 days earlier had thrown me off kilter, and I'd yet to recover. I'd deal with the puzzle later. Like an archaeologist with the shards of a clay urn, maybe I'd tease from it a buried truth about my father. For now, a shot of whiskey would settle me. In the upper cabinet, closest to the fridge, as expected, I found a bottle of Woodford Reserve bourbon. It was Dad's go-to drink. The plastic seal on top was unbroken. I'd assumed he'd gotten sauced on his favorite whiskey the night he got sloppy drunk and died. I checked again, but there wasn't an open bottle. The recycling bin contained soda cans, but no empty liquor bottle. The sink and dishwasher were empty. No dirty glass anywhere. I tore off the seal, uncorked it, poured a double, and took my drink out to the balcony. By day, the view was stunning. Blue ocean and white wave caps out to the horizon, obstructed only by a couple of artfully placed tall palms. Street lamps illuminated the boardwalk, but until moonrise, darkness shrouded the ocean. The pounding of the restless sea was fierce. Was it really louder at night, or was that an illusion? Other than the crash of the surf, only sporadic traffic noise and muffled voices wafted up to the balcony. The night air was in the mid-60s, balmier than I'd expected. When I left New York that morning, a light snow was falling. A deep breath of beachy air cooled my nostrils. A couple of cobwebbed, rickety chairs and a small round table nearly filled the cramped balcony. Nothing was amiss, but I couldn't bring myself to look over the railing. Blood, even the hint of it, made me queasy. If I didn't look at the patch of concrete below, could I forget the untoward details? I'd invent a more palatable alternative. He died in his sleep. Strangers would offer a sympathetic nod. That's the way to go, they'd say. Eventually, the neat little lie would become the truth. The reality, though, was messy. There had been a lot of blood where he landed. No sign of forced entry or struggle. No suicide note, no witnesses. His blood alcohol content had been .09. Legally intoxicated, though barely. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. A drunken accident, police said. That's all I knew. I plopped into a chair and swung one foot up to rest on the metal rail of the balcony wall. As soon as my sneaker hit it, the rail gave way. A 3-foot section of steel pipe clanked onto the balcony. Startled, I kicked away from the wall, almost overturning the lightweight chair in a backflip. I reflexively threw my hands up to regain balance. In doing so, I tossed my drink in the air. The glass shattered in front of me. I jumped to avoid the downpour of whiskey and fusillade of crystal splinters. Jesus, holy fuck! The blood vessels in my temples pulsed. My breath was quick. I wasn't hurt, just rattled. Fear of heights kept me back from the ledge. The rail added 6 inches to the balcony enclosure. Where it was absent, the wall was less than 3 feet high, not even reaching my hip. It was safe, so long as I was steady. Had the rail been loose or missing before Dad fell? Or did it become loose when he went over it? My fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as I poured a fresh lowball of whiskey. I lifted the glass close enough to smell the caramel notes. It teetered in my unsteady hand. The amber liquid lapped against the wall of the glass like the ocean's edge ruffling over the sand. I'd hoped that staying in the apartment would help me grieve. By immersing myself in the sights, sounds, and smells of Dad's life, I thought the process would start naturally. Spending the night alone in this dump now seemed a stupid idea. What I needed was a good fuck, a cock in my mouth, or vice versa. It had been almost a week since I'd had an orgasm other than by my left hand. Using the phone on the kitchen wall, I dialed a number I hadn't called in more than a year. I still knew it by heart. Why break the silence? Maybe I needed a father figure. Did it matter? I just wanted to talk to Ishmael Washington, my English professor from undergrad days at UCLA. There was nothing wrong with that. Pick up, Ish, I said. Pick up. I need you. On the 4th ring, a recording answered. You've reached Ish's answering machine. The clear Midwestern enunciation and sonorous timbre was Professor Washington's lecture voice. After one gimlet or martini, the Detroit streets could be heard at the edges of his Ivy League diction. After a second drink, he'd slur his words and show a sly, sexy hint of a smile. It was the latter version that I imagined for bedtime wanks. The pre-recorded message ended with a beep. I froze. What should I say? Before I could hang up, there was a voice. Hold on, Ish said. I'm here. Let me shut off the machine. Hello? Hello? Oh, hi. It's me. Sam? Fuck, I should have hung up. Too late now, he'd recognized my voice. Yeah, it's me. Where are you? I'm back home for a visit. I thought maybe... Maybe what? The thought was stillborn, and the silence grew uncomfortably long. After forever, in reality just a second or two, Ish spoke. Now isn't a good time. He spoke quickly. Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. Let's talk later. I'm just stepping out. Call me back. We'll set something up. A brush-off for sure. I should never have called. When I graduated UCLA and left for Columbia, I went silent on him. No calls, no letters. No hard feelings on my part. I just didn't want a long-distance relationship. Goodbye was uncomfortable, so I avoided it. Stupid and immature, I know. There'd been nobody regular since then. What could an ex-lover do, anyway? Comfort me in his arms? Say everything would be okay? Forgive me for my callousness? A stranger could do just as well, maybe better. Fuck the blues away. Good dick or bad, either would provide a happy enough ending. I could trawl the gay bars for a one-night stand, wouldn't be the first time, but another idea had taken root. Like a weed, it was unwelcome and hard to eradicate. I freshened up my armpits, cock and balls with a soapy hand towel. I groomed my pubes with a razor, stretching the loose skin over the nuts to avoid nicking. After changing clothes, I took stock in the bedroom mirror. A mop of straight brown hair parted on the left cascaded over my forehead, a curved lock dangling over the right eye. A heartthrob cut. My slight frame hunched at the shoulders. The pale skin had an olive hue, my mother's coloring, but not as dark. Was I still hot enough? Was early 20s too old to get a silver-haired daddy for the night? There were dark patches between the streetlights on this derelict stretch of Santa Monica Boulevard, just as I remembered. When I said the boulevard in my shorthand lingo, it was this end, the seedier side where West Hollywood became Hollywood. The Warner Brothers studio lot, enclosed by an ivy-covered wall, dominated the block. Across a narrow side street, an old trolley car had been converted into a Chinese restaurant. There were black and white studio publicity shots above the bar. It wasn't the greasy chow mein or the chance to see a movie star that drew me here. I hung out on the boulevard when I was 17 because that's where older men cruised to pick up younger ones. 6 years later, the boulevard still drew lost boys and the men who hired them. A baby-faced blonde, maybe 17 or 18, was already standing at what used to be my spot in front of the studio lot. The new boy was about the same age I'd been the last time I was there. Despite the age gap, Blondie recognized me as a fellow lost boy. I stopped to bum a cigarette from the new kid. The last time I'd smoked was there, on the boulevard. "Thanks," I said. "Stay safe." I moseyed farther down the way so as not to encroach on the new boy. It was his spot now. I slunk back in the shadows of the studio wall. A few cars slowed to a crawl in the curb lane as they saw my figure in the dark, my face illuminated by the orange glow of the cigarette. A hit of nicotine notched up my heartbeat. As I'd hoped, the thrill of the hunt displaced morbid thoughts of my father. A Porsche rolled by. No. A Mercedes. No. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A beige Volvo station wagon. Bingo. I stepped to the curb, and the car stopped. There was a child's seat in the back. Perfect, a family man with a wife and kid at home. The driver looked to be about 40. "Hi, Daddy." "You're cute," Mr. Volvo said. "Want a date?" He was calm, a good sign. I was in no mood to break in an awkward newbie. "With you, handsome?" "Sure." My boulevard persona was confident and flirty. It wasn't a mask. The Lost Boy version of myself was just as real as the other one. The Lost Boy's alter ego, Good Boy Sam, was more at home on the fancy-pants side of town, where West Hollywood abutted Beverly Hills. That one enjoyed Sunday brunches with bottomless mimosas, yet was also a studious academic. I got in the car and we headed to a nearby motel. "Nice night," the John said. "Yes, Daddy, a nice night for Dick." "You naughty boy. You dirty old man." Mr. Volvo smiled. "I'm not old. I'm not a boy." "How old are you?" "How old do you want me to be?" We laughed at the stupid joke. The body talk could have been the script for a bad porno. The other Sam would have cringed at the raunchy banter. "So banal," the earnest Sam would have said. To the lost boy, it was foreplay. I imagined pleasing Daddy and forgetting, for a few hours, about the real father waiting to be buried. At the motel, it was time to get down to it. We undressed, and the man handed me a condom. I would be top that night. Even better. The skin-on-skin contact, the scent of arousal, the release, I needed it badly. I wasn't in the mood for more dirty talk, and Mr. Volvo didn't seem to miss it. The sex was wordless and quick. Afterwards, we washed and dressed. I had to visit Sheila tomorrow. Ugh. The funeral was the day after. There'd be my father's work colleagues. I resented these strangers who'd spent more time with my father than I had. It wasn't fair. What the fuck? That was Good Boy Sam chattering in my head. He was back too soon. Seduction, fantasy, and the oxytocin spike. The triple shot was supposed to keep the good boy at bay, at least for a few hours. Why wasn't it working? Whatever showed on my face, the John took notice. "Son, are you all right?" Son? The condescending concern just made things worse. That wasn't the deal, for Christ's sake. Daddy had just been fucked by a hot boy. We were supposed to pretend it was all fun and good. Had I asked him about the missus and kids? Of course not. Worst of all, Mr. Volvo's question was almost word for word the same as the one asked by the last man who'd picked me up on the boulevard. The man with the dead eyes. My cheeks burned as red as an iron poker in a blazing fire. "Boy, are you all right?" That's what the monster, he didn't deserve to be called a John, had said in a different, cheap motel room 6 years earlier. I'd tried ever since to blot out that demon's face and what he'd done to me. At 17, I hadn't stood up for myself. Not that I could have stopped him. He was too big and strong. Mr. Volvo was a different story, a mild-mannered bottom. He wasn't the one who lived in my nightmares, but it didn't matter. "Don't call me son." There was an animal growl in my voice. "You're not my fucking dad." As if my body had saved every blow from Mr. Deadeye's, there was a punch inside me, buzzing to get out. I stepped forward, fists clenched. Mr. Volvo backed up, the lily whites of his eyes large around his dark irises. "Whoa!" He raised his hands in a gesture of submission. "You're right, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry." The fear in Mr. Volvo's eyes stopped me. What was I doing? I hadn't been in a fight since grubby Billy McFarthing in 3rd grade, and then I hadn't even hit back. Mr. Volvo wasn't a rapist. He was just a sanctimonious suburban dad who thought he could save the lost boy. I could still summon a punch, but now there were tears inside. Tears for myself and all the fatherless lost boys. I stuffed down the mosh pit of emotions and rushed out into the night. I didn't even get my money. Those first few days after getting the news were not my best. Months later, after I could reflect on the whole sordid affair, I wondered what had stopped Dad and I from making better use of the time we could have had together. Second chances aren't guaranteed, and I'd squandered one of them. Maybe the problem is we don't recognize second chances for what they are until they've passed.